talking about, and it goes back to 2015 when Stephen Smith was found dead in the middle of a road in the low country of South Carolina. At the time, it had local notoriety, but there weren't a ton of media outlets from around the country and around the world talking about it. Well, they are now, and they are because of what happened this year, which was the prosecution of Alex Murdaugh, who was convicted in 2023. Now, from the outside looking in, from here, it's like, well, what does one thing have to do with the other? Well, that's really the question here, and it's a big question. We don't know. That's why this investigation is now heating up, and people are hoping to get some answers as to whether or not there is any connection. But the fact that Alex Murdaugh has been convicted changes a lot down in that part of the country, especially down in Hampton County. It really changes the perception of the influence of the Murdaughs and their ability to control investigations, control narratives, and perhaps skirt justice. That's over. That game ended with that conviction for double murder by Alex Murdaugh. Now he's facing a series of things we know about that. But let's get back to Stephen Smith, because there was an investigation, and a lot of those materials have now been released from the original investigation, which seemed to come to the conclusion that this was a hit and run. Which, by the way, a hit and run, you still have to solve the case because somebody struck him, killed him, and then left the scene. We don't know if they did it on purpose or if it was an accident. But what we really don't know is if that even happened, or if it was just the fact that his body was found in the road and there was a presumption and an assumption that it was a hit and run. Does the evidence match the conclusion? And by the way, we still have to figure out who's responsible for this. There's a family that deserves answers, and someone needs to be brought to justice for what happened here. So we're focusing a lot on this week. Chanley Painter, Court TV legal correspondent, is returning to the scene and is back down in the Low Country, visiting different locations, speaking to people, and going through all of those documents that have now been released and trying to put some pieces together here. And Chanley Painter joins us now live from Hampton County, South Carolina, where she has been all day, where there's been some weather, some rain, etc. Chanley, great to see you. So let's start with the scene of the death of Stephen Smith, where someone took his life. One way or the other, someone took his life. What did you see today? What did you find out? And what sort of struck you about the scene?
Yeah, great to be with you, Benny. I'm here in downtown Hampton, South Carolina, in Hampton County. About 10 miles, actually like 10 minutes from where I'm standing would be the location where 19-year-old Stephen Smith's body was found in the middle of the road. And like you said, it was a bit rainy earlier this afternoon when we were out there, but here is what I learned. Let's watch. It was here along this rural Hampton County road in the early morning hours of July 8th, 2015, where a passing motorist spotted a body lying here on the center line and called 911.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
Hello, I just going down the Parkerville Road. I see somebody laying out.
It was a warm Wednesday morning around 4 a.m., so that means it was dark out here. There were no street lights on this narrow two-lane highway, just some power lines, the road flanked by a field on one side and then trees on the other, with a couple of houses around the area. But within minutes, on that early morning, Hampton County Sheriff's officers responded to the scene. They soon requested the South Carolina Highway Patrol, but what they saw here raised a lot of questions. The location of the body was odd. There was no glass in the road, no skid marks or other vehicle debris. The victim, whom police later identified as 19-year-old Stephen Smith, had no injuries consistent with someone being struck by a vehicle in the road. In fact, his loosely tied tennis shoes were still on his feet, and his undamaged cell phone and car keys were still in his front pocket. Stephen Smith looked only to have trauma to the right side of his head that investigators first believed was a gunshot wound. Anthony, Vinny, according to reports at that scene, the assistant coroner pointed out to the investigators what she believed to be a defensive wound on the victim's hand. But ultimately, later that day, when Stephen Smith's body was taken to autopsy, the medical examiner determined that it was a cause of death was due to an apparent hit-and-run accident, and that, of course, changed the course of the investigation from then on out. Let's take a look. Go
ahead.
I want to show you this scene as mapped out in 2015, Vinny, because, again, SLED was involved initially in the investigation because those initial first responders believed that this was a homicide. Here's what that depiction looks like from investigators. This is the SLED crime scene investigators put this together. It shows the positioning of the body in the middle of the road. Those first responders really only noted injuries to the head area. There were no broken bones, we later learned. And then the location itself was suspicious, according to these reports, because usually a hit and run, a body isn't usually still in the road when being struck by a vehicle moving 55 miles per hour. And also, his shoes were still on his feet. His phone was undamaged. His cell phone still in his front pocket, along with his keys. This phone is key to the investigation. However, they had trouble unlocking that cell phone, Vinny. I have confirmed they did unlock it in 2017. It is now in the possession of SLED, of course, but that will be key leading up to who may be responsible for this. But another thing that stands out is the location of the body of Stephen Smith, and of course where his vehicle was found, is only a few minutes from where he's now buried. We passed it several times today, working on these elements and putting together the story for you tonight. Here's what it looks like. It was definitely the most decorated gravesite in the entire cemetery, Gooding Cemetery. His mom, Sandy Smith, has told me that she likes to collect cats, cat figurines, and place them at the grave there. He loved animals. He loved cats. And this this headstone was actually provided by funds from a GoFundMe account. A year or two ago, they raised money to make this nice, beautiful headstone. You can see it right from the road, Vinny, as you drive up and down Bamberg Highway, not far from, actually it's on Sandy Run Road, not far from where he passed away.
All right, Chanley, stand by. I want to bring into our conversation in Charleston, South Carolina, investigative consultant Steve Peterson. Steve, great to see you again tonight. I know you've spent a lot of time working this case. Let me start with what I saw. I saw a road that seemed very straight in one direction. The other direction, there was a bit of a curve. Is there any theory by those who believe it's a hit and run which way the car was even going?
No, I don't believe there was any theory in that respect. As you said, in the middle of the night, there's no street lights. There was little ambient light from the moon. The weather was just it wasn't a starry, bright lit night. So you couldn't really tell from that location you're showing right at the moment. You can see a straight, but looking back the other way, there's a slight curve. They show a cornfield on one side. Corn was quite high back then. 2015, on the other side, there were more woods. They've since harvested a lot of the trees, so that lot looks more mowed down. But back then, you can see trees on one side, cornfield on the other side. So you can't really tell in which direction the vehicle was traveling, if in fact it was a vehicle that struck Stephen.
Right, and I always come back to that because the first thing I think about is it's not a super busy road, it's not a super highway, right? So if you're walking down the road, would you hear the car coming? Would you see the lights coming, whether it was behind you or in front of you? And how would you end up getting struck? It makes no sense to me how you could be on that particular road.
Yeah, no, you're right. Especially at night, you'd see the oncoming headlights long before the car got close to you or the truck got close to you. You would have indication that there was a vehicle coming. And in fact, Sandy, Stephen's mom, was very adamant that he would not have been walking in the road. He would have been along the side or even kind of off in the ditch. Being a 19-year-old openly gay man in that part of the state, He's very reluctant to be out in the middle of the road. He's more secretive or more guarded, we'll say, than the average person. So he wouldn't have been in the middle of the road.
What did you think of the position?
Was there.
Yeah. What did you think of the position of the body and where it was found, the position that it was in, the fact that the cell phone is not damaged?
Well, there's a lot of questions that come into mind. I am not a highway investigator. That's not my forte. I was a paramedic many years ago. I've seen more than my share of car accidents, but I didn't investigate them. So a lot of the information that I received regarding the accident, I would forward on to my colleagues who are also retired. Some of them are active duty in various agencies across the Southeast. And I would say, give me your impression of this. Tell me this. Would this happen? Would that happen? Is this unusual? Is that unusual? And there's really no answer to any of it because you can come up with a scenario that could explain all of it. We just don't know what that scenario is. As I discussed with you last time, we had two theories of what happened. And based on the information that I received from SLED, we kind of discounted one and then focused more on the other. The second theory being that it was an accidental vehicle strike, that a vehicle did hit him, and that there may have been some damage to the vehicle, but the vehicle may have been damaged ahead of time. The mirror may have already been broken, so there wasn't any glass to be found because there wasn't any glass in the mirror. It could have just been the frame of the mirror that struck him. Don't know all the details, and at this point now, nearly 8 years later, you'd be hard-pressed to find that you have any physical evidence left.
I want to take another listen to that 911 call, because this is how the investigation starts. Let's take a listen.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
Hello, I was going down Crockerville Road. I see somebody laying out.
And is it in the road or on the side of the road?
It's in the road.
Oh, in the road?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll get an officer headed out that way to see what's going on.
I ain't moving or nothing like that, but somebody going to hit him in the top. Somebody going to hit him.
All right, we'll get an officer headed out that way.
Do we know if this witness was ever interviewed?
He was interviewed by the Highway Patrol. I believe he may have been interviewed later on by SLED, but he's just a poor guy going to work first thing in the morning, drives by, sees this body in the road. He was quite scared that it was some kind of setup. So he didn't want to stop. He just kept going and called 911 immediately, reported it as he was driving away.
And he was driving, was it light out when he was driving?
No, it was still dark out.
Still dark, but he was able to see
5 o'clock in the morning.
He was able to see a body laying in the road, yet we're going to try to believe that someone driving down, seeing someone standing up and walking, didn't see the pedestrian.
Well, you're right. He did see a body in the road with his headlights. And under my theory, the vehicle that was involved, the occupants were intoxicated. So who knows what they saw? But they weren't paying attention. They were not. They were drunk. They were out driving, and it was an accident that they struck Stephen. If my theory holds up.
And what are your thoughts? After speaking with investigators who were at the scene, because some of them questioned that it didn't look like a hit and run. What was it to them that didn't make it seem like a hit and run that others would say, yes, it could be?
Well, some of the conclusions that you discussed earlier with Chanley, you got the shoes still on his feet. You have the body in the middle of the road, right on the line. And normally you would assume that if a vehicle struck a person, he would glance off in one direction or the other. And even my experience as a paramedic would show you that the shoes would fly off. If he had a phone loosely in his pocket, that might bounce out of his pocket, depending on how fast the vehicle was traveling when it struck him, and depending on the significance or the angle of the blow. So there's a lot of things that take into effect. It could have been a glancing blow, but at a decent speed, a glancing blow can have deadly effects. So it's, you until you recreate it, until you know all the facts, it's hard to speculate In fact, that's all we have is speculation.
And we've got an unsolved case. That's the main problem here. All right, Steve's going to stay with us this hour.